Long ago, the people of Derptopia lived in harmony with magic. Powerful mages and reclusive witches harnessed raw arcane powers to accomplish the impossible. Powerful empires ruled the lands in peace. That is, of course, until the day of the dragon. It was a day like any other. The farmers tilled their lands, the streets smelt of fresh bread and the summer harvest. Then, the shadow appeared. Day turned to night as the mighty dragon descended on the kingdom, destroying castles and villages, ravaging and scouring the lands as he looked for his prize. It was not gold that Shadowbringer treasured, but magic itself. When the dust settled, the people emerged to find that their magic was gone. Years passed as the people adapted. Some turned to metal and machines to replace the arcane, but always its absence was felt. Most accepted their fate, but one did not. From the shadows rose a mighty hero, her name lost to time. Using her wits and powerful weapons collected from the lost realms, the hero summoned Shadowbringer to face justice. Their battle raged for 3 days before they both fell. With his last breath, Shadowbringer returned the magic to Derptopia. Our hero was buried in a nearby field, and on her grave grew a tree more beautiful and powerful than any other. The people call it the Calamity, signaling the end of the Age of Calamity. Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Derptopia SMP. My name is Fiasco. Thank you so much for joining me. We're doing things a little bit differently this episode because this episode is all about lore. What is lore? How do you make lore? Are we talking about Data's brother from Star Trek? Lore? No, we're talking about history of your world. Now, let's start off with just a few quick things. That intro that I put together is the lore of my world, which I had an absolute blast writing. I had so much fun. I just sat down one day, typed away, and it was probably like a few paragraphs, and it really helped me set the tone and the mood for my own world. And it also, just in writing that story, inspired me to build new things. I want a statue for our hero. I want a ruined castle and towers and all of this that just really got inspired by this story that I only spent like 10 minutes writing. So first things first, what is lore? Well, essentially, lore is history. Now, I Googled it just to make sure I wasn't way off base here, but yeah, it's essentially like a collection of traditions and stories from a time. Now, it can be fictional or it can be real. You know, the real world has lore, but we're not focused on that. We're focused on creating our own lore. Now, it's important to note that I am not a creative writer or a creative writer teacher by any means. This isn't meant to be a course in how to be a creative writer when it comes to your lore. That's not me. I've got some experience in that, and I love that kind of stuff, but that's certainly not my background. So if that's what you're expecting to get out of this, I'm sorry. I can give you more tools to help with your lore, but definitely not a course on how to be a creative writer. So let's start with identifying your world's lore. Now, this is going to kind of apply to Minecraft, but it could also apply to a lot of different things. But for the purpose of this exercise, let's all just pretend that we're just all playing the same game, Minecraft. Now, for the worlds that you just saw, and the world that I play in most of the time, Derptopia, I drew on a fantasy inspiration. Now, I've made this distinction several times, and I can't state it enough. It's not a medieval inspiration that I'm drawing from. It is a fantasy. And that is very different in a lot of ways. Not so much aesthetically, but in like the logic of how things work. So in the video, you saw a machine that it goes over top of a ravine and it harvests the power of the lava from the earth in order for the weapons and toolsmiths to power their forges. Now, that is not something that medieval blacksmith would have done. That is all pure fantasy. And I like building off of fantasy lore because it just allows me to go a lot more out there with my designs. If I was going for realism, if I wanted to make a real medieval village, I wouldn't be able to do something fun like that. So that's kind of where I thrive and where I like to be. So when you make your world's lore, it could be completely different than that. You could be making, and in a lot of cases most people are, you could be making a hyper-realistic medieval world. And in that case, that's perfectly fine. You just need to adjust your lore based on that. And that could be something like, Excalibur in the lake, the King Arthur. That's all real world lore. It's a bit fantastical, of course, but a lot of lore in the real world is made fantastical over time because they are stories that we tell each other. Of course, they get bigger and grander, and there are powerful wizards, but of course, magic doesn't exist anymore. So to say that realistic worlds don't have fantasy lore would not be accurate either. Same with a world where maybe magic doesn't exist anymore. Which, like you heard in my story, for a brief time in Derptopia, magic didn't exist. It was stolen by Shadowbringer, the dragon. Now, if you're going for something a little more futuristic, if you're going for a sci-fi build or something hyper-modern and very contemporary, you'll adjust the lore based on that as well. And it's just as simple as finding inspiration. And that is going to bring us to the next section of what I wanted to talk about, and that is finding inspiration for lore. Now, it is okay to not come up with your own lore 100%. Some of the greatest stories that have been told are inspired by other stories. Now, if I was to just take the screenplay to Lord of the Rings and say, this is my lore, that would be wrong. That's copyright infringement and just kind of icky to do all around. I mean, is anyone going to bother you that you're playing a Minecraft game and you're saying that you were once a hobbit that destroyed a ring? No, probably not. But still, it's not as much fun as taking that and building off of it. Maybe you do like the Lord of the Rings universe, but there is a character in the Prancing Pony bar who got pushed over during the shuffle and saw Frodo disappear, and maybe that's who your character is. Maybe that was the great-grandfather to your character, and he told stories, and that inspired your character to do things. So these are all just ways where we can get inspired based on things that we love. For me, personally, I like playing Dungeons and Dragons. I know it's, if you haven't played it before, you've almost certainly heard of it. A classic nerd game of fantasy and rolling dice and all of this. But, and it's going to sound like I'm working for Dungeons and Dragons. I'm really not. I just love the game. It is a very, very good outlet for creativity. If you are somebody who has a lot of creativity pent up in them and you don't really have an outlet for getting it out of you, just maybe give it a shot, because it's a lot of fun. You meet a lot of creative people and you learn a lot about lore, real world lore. That's where they built Dungeons and Dragons from. Stories from different cultures of the Fey Wild, of infernal realms. These are fantasy stories that have been passed down in the real world for generations. You know, Celtic lore, Norwegian trolls, like this, it all inspires this absolutely wonderful game. And then you just get the ball rolling in your own mind, creativity-wise. And that's really how I like to find inspiration, is just thinking about these worlds that are infinite and endless, and the only limitation is your imagination. And it sounds corny, but it works for me. Now, one of the most important things to know about lore is that it is inspiring in itself. Like I said earlier, I sat down and for probably 20 minutes wrote that intro and just came up with the things that I had already had in my world, the things that I was planning on building, and how those could all make sense. I knew that I wanted to put a dragon skeleton in, and I needed to start putting things together. So you can also build lore off of what you already have, and it kind of works in sync with each other. So I found out that the dragon wasn't good. The dragon had stolen magic and was defeated by a powerful hero. I didn't know all of that before I started building the dragon skeleton. That's something that came to me as I was working on it. And lore informing your building is equally as important as your building informing your lore. You can build a machine that flies or is powered by, iron golems running on a treadmill or something like that. And you can think, oh, wow, that's a really cool thing. Why is this happening? Who invented this? When did this come about? And why did this come about? And these type of things really help fill out your world. Now, Derptopia is still a very new world. We've got a lot of filling out to do. But now that I have a story, a little bit of lore, a little bit of inspiration, it's going to be a lot easier for me to go about building something new. Like I said, I want to do a statue of this hero. I don't know how to do a statue, but I'm willing to learn because the story calls for it. There's a lot of creative writing classes that you can take, even simple ones online, if you want to get better at that kind of thing. But really, creativity is creativity, and whatever your creative outlet is, maybe tap into that and see if it will inspire your story. Like I said, give Dungeons & Dragons a try. Maybe try just jotting down some things in a journal. Maybe draw a picture. You never know when your creativity is going to strike. So I hope you've learned a little bit about lore. I know that this episode was a little bit different, but I had a lot of fun making it, and we'll return to building and shenanigans in the next episode. But for now, I am going to say goodbye, fellow adventurers. My name is Fiasco, and I will catch you in the next one.